Welcome to Moments with Marianne. Allow me to interrupt your train of thought with something that may be one of the most interesting things you hear today. This is Marianne Pastana, and our special guest today is Ed Hajim, and he's here to share his new book, On the Road Less Traveled, An Unlikely Journey from the Orphanage to the Boardroom. And let me tell you, this book is a great read. So let's welcome to the show, Ed Hajim.
That's great to be here.
You know, what an honor it is to have you here and to talk about this book. I got to tell you, once I started diving into it, I could not put it down, but I'm sure you get that from everybody.
I'm actually surprised that it really it's exceeded every one of my expectations. I've had a very close friend who doesn't read books. He said, I'm going to skim this one. He said, I sat down at 4:00 in the afternoon and I finished at 4:00 in the morning. So it has been a book that people have had trouble putting down. I guess I give my ghostwriter a lot of credit.
Well, you did really good. We'll put it this way, because the book came together so beautifully. And so, gosh, I mean, you have such an intriguing story. Why was now the right time to write this book?
Well, I had pressure put on me by my family saying, I'm getting to certain ages that maybe it won't last too long. We really want to get the history. And then Horatio Alger basically uncovered a bunch of my history. And then at the University of Rochester, when I was chairman of the board of trustees, they wanted to know more about me. And when I started to write it, I started to learn quite a bit about myself. So I found it to be an interesting experience. And then when I finished the first galleys, I sent it out to some close friends, figuring I was just print it for family and close friends. And I got, as you look at the back of the book and look at the blurbs, the 15 blurbs, basically people said, this has to be read by every freshman in every college in the United States. And I got constant comments like that. So it convinced me that in my life, this was what's next. You know, I basically at a point in my life where I'm still involved in companies and in business and so on, but this could be a very important step for me. And if it does help young people get over some of those early bumps, then it will be worthwhile doing. And so far, I found that young people are really relating to this, especially since their parents are sending the books and requiring them to read them.
Well, I'm sure they're enjoying reading the books too, because my goodness, I mean, you got 5 stars. A lot of people just love this book and they're really kind of sharing about how it's impacting their lives.
Yeah, we're up to about 160 or 175 star ratings, which is way beyond anything I ever expected.
You're making a big wave there. My goodness, you know?
Yeah, lucky.
So why don't you share with our listeners? I mean, because they look at you and they're like, gosh, you know, this guy's got all the, you know, passion and the drive and he's got plans, but how did everything start off for you?
Well, you know, that's one of the things interesting about my life that makes me somewhat different from people, because I started out in a very unusual circumstance where, you know, my father had lost everything in 29. Then he got married just after that. And the marriage didn't work out. In fact, he said the only happy point in his life was when I was born in 1936. And then 3 years later, my mother divorced him. And he couldn't live without me. So he turned down and kidnapped me and basically said my mother had passed away. I think there are very few people that have that kind of a circumstance. And in the 30s, you know, things were pretty tough. And of course, then my father was drafted or volunteered to become an officer in the Merchant Marines in the Second World War. So I essentially was abandoned at age 3, abandoned at age 5. And you'll find out from the book I was abandoned again at age 15 by my father. And, you know, I one of my ghostwriters, who I thought was an outstanding writer, wanted me to hate my father. And I didn't. I love my father because he was all that I had. And he gave me unconditional love the best he could do it, given the fact that his profession was to be a radio operator on a ship at sea. So we couldn't spend much time together. And in my first 18 years of life, I think we spent the better part of maybe 2 years together. And so it was a very difficult upbringing. But the upbringing, you know, as I look back on it, and that's why I'm glad I wrote the book, and I'm finding many of my disadvantages during that period of time became advantages in later life. Understand, if you live in, as I did, in 15 or 20 different places before you're 18 years old, you develop a capability of being adaptable. In fact, as you start to embrace change, and you sort of like change. And you see, in my life, I was able to change when it was necessary without too much difficulty. A lot of people who have a very stable background have a great deal of difficulty changing. And, I really embrace change. And actually, that was a positive in my business career. I also developed resilience, perseverance. Later on, I developed empathy for people who had similar backgrounds. And later in life, and right now, I developed gratitude. I mean, I'm really grateful for everything that has happened to me. So that's a very bad synopsis of an 18-year period. But I spent from age 3 until age 15 in 15 different Catholic foster homes and 2 Jewish orphanages. So it was quite a trip.
Yeah, that's quite a journey you took. And it's interesting. A lot of people, you have I think like there's 2 group of people when it comes to being in that type of situation. Correct me if I'm wrong. I would think that you've got the people who are able to adapt and change, and others who kind of get broken by going through that experience.
I think that's one of the things that I've tried. One of my messages in the book, and I do talk to young people, never become a victim if you can help it. It's an easy thing to say, not an easy thing to do. The energy when you become a victim is enormous, but if you take that energy and focus it forward on what's next, which is not easy either, you have a better chance of achieving your goals. But if you get caught up in hating people or hating situations or blaming people or blaming situations, that just reduces your energy that you need to go forward. So that's one of my messages. And of course, my main message is anything is possible. And one of the reasons that anything is possible is if you don't become a victim, there are so many things you can do with that energy. So, and I didn't become a victim as a child. I kept looking ahead, and I give credit to my father, who constantly said that I would have a better life. He kept telling me that, although he wasn't giving it to me. And the Catholic Church, the Catholic schools, there were a simple set of rules. If you followed those rules, they kind of convinced me that I would have a good life. And of course, if I didn't follow them, I wouldn't have a good life. So that was sort of the basis for it. And in those days, movies were very different. In those days, movies and the radio always portrayed the good person being successful. You had a lot of heroes on the big screen, John Wayne and Jimmy Stewart and so forth, that if they always seemed to come out ahead. And movies were one of the things that, children like me, that was their great gift, was to be able to go Saturday afternoon to the theater. And of course, in the afternoon, you had radio programs with Jack Armstrong and Terry and the Pirates and people like that where the good guy always seemed to win the war.
And that just builds greater imagination on top of, having hope,
And I had one foster family, which was a classic example of what I thought a family would be like. The last family I had in California, whose name was Rob, they were really, really a wonderful family. And it was a classic American family, and they accepted me just like their son and treated me that way. So I had sort of an example halfway through my early life to really sort of, this is something that I wanted. And, I haven't figured out exactly why some people spiral down and some, get through the whole process. But one of it is having some of these things in the background. And I'm hooked up with a group of people now who counsel young people. And with my book, I feel is a counseling mechanism. We get people early on to convince them not to spiral down, but to basically use that energy to find out, exercise their passion, find out what they really want to do, and convince them that in most cases, America will give you a chance. Anything is possible.
Thank goodness for that, right?
Yeah, right.
Well, and where did you develop this just immense passion you have? Because I think a lot of people, they hear about your story and they're like, wow, how did he do that?
Well, I found that I got very excited somewhere in my junior year in high school. I started to realize my way out of everything was basically a private college. I was early on to the concept that education is the solution to everything. And then I started putting my shoulder to the wheel, got good grades. I was an athlete. And I got very passionate about math and science and very passionate about athletics. Also, I say I had five passions: math, science, baseball, basketball, and girls. And all those things required energy. So I had to bring the energy forward. And luckily, I've always had a lot of energy. And as I went to college, my passions, morphed and changed. They changed from math and science into engineering. And, baseball and basketball into intramural sports and extracurricular activities. And in one of my extracurricular activities, I found my true passion. And that's why I say to young people, keep trying things out because you're not sure your passion will change. And what it was in my junior year, while taking a very heavy load of academics, I decided I wanted to form a humor magazine just because I felt that in Rochester, people were too serious and it was a place where fun went to die. And so I created this magazine by putting 30 people together. And I really got a kick out of seeing people exceed their own expectations and create things that they didn't think they could create when they started. And that really got me all excited. I didn't find out that that was my true passion until partway through my business career when I started. Every time I got a kick out of putting people together to create a new product or establish a program or change a system, I got an enormous amount of excitement out of watching people exceed their own expectations and do things they didn't think they could do. And then simultaneously, what that did for me is I always kind of exceeded my own expectations by putting pressure on people and helping them exceed their own expectations. In that particular experience in my junior year, I did exceed my expectations. And I found that by taking partners, to having partners do things that I couldn't do, but helping them do better than they thought they could, that was a great passion. And that sort of fueled itself. It kept getting better and better for me. But I think that's something that everybody, once you discover your passion, and I know, Marianne, you must have one because you're doing this, you find out it's really easier to do things than if you're kind of doing something you really don't enjoy. But you have to search it out. It doesn't come easily. And sometimes you got to put it off for a while.
I think that's encouraging to a lot of young people because there seems to be a lot of pressure to like find out what you're going to do. And you may not, I mean, that's kind of a young age to kind of be, try to figure all that stuff out where you may not have the right fit yet.
That's right. And you got to try different things. I mean, I truly wanted to be, when I was at Harvard Business School, I wanted to be an international businessman. So I took my first summer that I had a chance, that in between school years, I went to Belgium, worked at Belgium as a chemical engineer in a chemical plant in Belgium, and found out no, it wasn't for me. And so the next summer, even though I had a job offer, I took a job for that summer in Central America, figuring maybe it wasn't, a developed country would be for me, maybe a developing country or a young country. I also found that was not for me. So I tested both of those things. And I think that's what you have to do as a young person. Now I look back at my background. Sophomore year in college, I thought I might be a physicist. So I took advanced physics, almost flunked out, got a D plus and got the devil out of that course very quickly and realized that physics wasn't for me. So I think that's what people have to do. And that's why I say to young people, never waste a summer. Find something you want to do or a place you want to be and go and do it. Geography is important. If you're excited about the Far East, go to Japan or China. If you're excited about Europe, go to Europe. Find any kind of a job that you can do with those places and find out whether you really like it or not. And so I've said these 2 jobs in international business. I really love traveling and I love foreign countries, but I was too early. In the 1960s, international business was still a very difficult place to be, and it was too hard to succeed. And I found something else that was more interesting for me, which is the financial business.
You were just ahead of your time.
Oh no, in the international, I was ahead of my time. And you can't be. I had a young one of my persons I always quoted said, being too early is equal to error. Because if you get into something too early and it takes too much time, decades to come into being, you're too frustrated by the time it becomes important. Get that wind at your back kind of early on, and things become a little bit easier.
I know exactly what you mean by taking time to find your fit. And we talked about this once before, but I went into the nursing program thinking, oh yeah, I want to help people and do this. Blood makes me pass out. So it was a poor career choice.
Well, that is so true, and you have different kinds of things that impact you. I always kid about a friend of mine who loved gold mining and loved Alaska, and he loved helping the Indians up there. Everything was fine until he married a woman who didn't like the cold. So you have to sort of put all this framework together and find that if you can marry your passion to some kind of a trend that's going to go on in your life and find partners, including a spouse that goes along with you, then you'll have it made. But it's a balancing act. And as you say, that's classic. He went into nursing and sure enough didn't like blood. That doesn't work at all.
No.
But each job has different characteristics. I think in today's world, there are so many opportunities that's why it's a little easier to find your passion today, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many opportunities for people to investigate. It's real exciting.
And it's easier. In my day, in many respects, when you entered a business, you had to have capital, and it was very difficult. A lot of big companies. Today, people start with can put 3 or 4 people together and have a couple of clients and be in business overnight. Well, look what we're doing. You couldn't do this at any time in history until now.
It's so exciting. We get to reach all around the world,
No,
talk
you
with
have a whole
people.
world market too. That's right, exactly.
Mm-hmm. So as we, look at your story, my goodness, I know a lot of people go, okay, well, you're in the orphanage, you found your passion. What made you decide to get into finance? Because I know you kind of went back and forth with, some of the international work. At what point did
Well,
you
I was a
decide?
chemical engineer, and I worked and I worked before Dustin Hoffman. I worked in plastics at a company called Hercules in Wilmington, Delaware. And I went to business school at night at Wharton. But as I got into the chemical business, I found out that, that being an engineer just didn't really, it was fun. I enjoyed myself. I did well, but I found that it wasn't broad enough for me. And so I decided I would go back to business school to see what that would, and I got advice from the professors at Wharton at night. They said I was wasting my time going to night school. I should go full time. And one of my mentors at the company said, Ed, go get your MBA. So I applied to Harvard Business School, and I strongly recommend graduate school for everybody. It gives you a chance to relook at yourself and relook at the world. And that's what Harvard Business School did for me. And I found out that the financial world gave me kind of everything that chemicals gave me, but it gave me a much more freedom. And it also gave me a broader viewpoint of everything. I felt being an analyst where I could get on a plane and go someplace and visit a company and talk to the management and find out what they were doing, and so it excited me. And I did eventually get back into management of people, but the financial business excited me. And also, I must admit, there was a monetary situation. When I graduated, I was going to go back to Hercules with my MBA and be involved in the chemical business. But they said, well, you went to business school. We're paying you $6,000 a year. We'll pay you $7,000 a year. And I had borrowed money to go to Harvard Business School, and I had a fairly sizable debt. And these people in the financial business, a company called Capital Research in Los Angeles, willing to pay me $11,500. Those numbers seem awfully small today, but they were quite a big difference between $11,000 and $7,000. And also, the people in Capital Research were excited about me coming to the firm. And I also found that although the chemical business was very competitive, the business at Capital Research were mutual funds. There were only about 3 or 4 companies in the business. And I believe this was a business going to grow very rapidly over the next 20 years, whereas the chemical business was going to be, it could have some problems because there were a lot of competition. So I went to that. There were many reasons for going into the financial business. Those were some of them. And it turns out I was right, because the mutual fund business was quite small when I went into it. And today it's in the trillions. And also the financial business was a very small business at that time. Most of the firms on Wall Street were really very small firms. And those people, they took 1 or 2 people a year, whereas people at a chemical firm would take, DuPont and Hercules would take a whole group of people every year. And I say that basically there were the enthusiasm for my background in the financial business seemed much greater than returning to the chemical business. So I made a pivot. And that's another thing in my book is never be afraid to make a pivot if there are enough good reasons. And I tell people that those reasons have to be written down too and stared at. And I did that.
Written down and stared at's a good idea.
Yeah, get those. I take that yellow pad out and draw a line in the middle, put plus on one side, minus on the other, and write down the reasons and see which ones get down the page. And it's really, I think that's a simple way to make decisions. But I've talked to young people in college, but one young man said to me at MIT, said, boy, that's interesting. I'll try that out. So I guess it isn't that well known or well utilized, but I think writing down the positives and negatives about your decision, being tough on yourself, you can come to better decisions. And those are key decisions. I could have gone back into the chemical business, and just for a little bit of historical perspective, if I'd have gone back, it turns out Hercules over the next 20 years did very poorly. And I would have been caught up in it, because you have to be very humble in the fact that you don't do much better than the company you're going to work for. And of course, the company I went to work for, Capital Research, flourished over the next 20 years. Unfortunately, I left them after 10 years and went to Wall Street. I did okay, but I could have stayed with them for the next, for my entire life, because they did extremely well for the next, my entire life. For 50 years. They've grown from $300 million to $2 trillion. So it was a real wonderful company, and it did very well.
Well, that's
But
pretty
Hercules on the
exciting.
Hem didn't do poorly. So these are the kinds of decisions that, make your life a very different one if you make the right ones.
Well, I think it's so important to really kind of take, like inventory of, different decisions you make, especially big decisions like that, and really kind of think through them, because you really approach that from a big picture kind of standard.
Yeah, I know. I think context is one thing I preach to people. Try to figure out when you're making a decision, what context are you entering? Is it one that's going to grow over the next 10 or 20 years, or is it one that's already too competitive? When I left the business school, most of the people went into places like General Motors and Ford, Procter and Gamble, Exxon, big quality companies, but they were already competitive and, not growing like some of the companies that I looked at. And so it's a very different experience. And today, young people do look at that. They look and say, I want to cure Alzheimer's, or I want to go into, VR or AR or artificial intelligence. And, you can see those industries are going to grow very rapidly. And so I think that's a little change. I think young people today are a little more sensitive to that and less sensitive to, finding a secure job. Because remember, I was at the end of the era where people went to work for a company for their entire life. And that started to change in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah, we don't really see that too much anymore.
No.
If at all, so it's a whole new landscape. But it's interesting because the information you teach with such wisdom, and like the life lessons you talk about, I think, are timeless. So it doesn't matter if it's now or 20 years from now, the principles still stay the same.
Marianne, you're right on. Thank you so much for catching that, because I did change jobs a number of times, and there were good reasons for them. And I use the E.F. Hutton job as where you decide that where your future is and where the future of your industry is, but your boss doesn't see it. If you then you have to change, because if you don't change, you'll go down the wrong path with your boss. And that's what happened to E.F. Hutton. I left Hutton because they wouldn't change. And, a few years later, they had to sell out. And, I left Lehman because they kicked me out, but that was another reason. So there's another life lesson there, Marianne. Wonderful. Lehman lesson's a wonderful lesson. You can do everything right for a significant period of time. In my case, 7 years. I turned around 2 divisions. I'm a little bit less modest about it, because I did do a very good job on both divisions. One securities business, the brokerage business, one the money management business. Money management business, I did a great job. If you read my book, there are even quotes about that what happened to me. But the boss wanted me to support him to do something I didn't believe in. He wanted to throw out the chairman, who was Pete Peterson, who I felt was fabulous. I said I wouldn't do it, so he pushed me out of the firm. So, you could then become a victim. I could have gone to the press. I had outside board of directors. I could have gone fought him. Instead, I said, onward to the next. I used my energy to find the next job. The next job turned out to be my dream job. So I chose not to be a victim, even though I could have been very easily, because he was wrong and I was right. But so what? You have to go on. And I used the energy to find a new job, which for the next 20 years was a great experience, because I was the chairman of a company. We grew it 20 times and had a lot of fun, and helped a lot of people and so forth. So, and the same thing in my golf course, when I was rejected by the golf course in Nantucket. Instead of, complaining and becoming a victim, we built our own golf course. No, I recommend that to people. You'll fail occasionally. I failed. I failed when I was in my early years. You'll find a very good, solid failure. And I always tell people that early failure is a gift, because you really learn from it. And I really learned from my failure. You'll read about it in the book.
Yeah, it's to really kind of, in many ways, kind of look at things differently, because a lot of times people look at failures and go, oh man, that's horrible, I'm bad. They get into this, horrible self-talk, but you really look at it as like, okay, there's opportunity here and there are things for me to learn.
Oh, the lessons you learn in failure are permanent, and also you learn that there is risk. You learn about risk, and you learn that things can change, things that are not in your control. You learn all kinds of things when you fail, because there are all kinds of reasons why you fail. And you normally, when you fail, you can always blame it on somebody else. And if you don't do that, then you're way ahead of the ball game. If you take the responsibility of failing, then you'll learn quite a bit from it. But a lot of people fail. Oh, my boss didn't do this, and in my case, there's an excuse in my book of why I failed. The home company didn't help me the way they should, but so what? That's life in the big. That's what happens to people, and it's very important that you try to go on. Take that energy that you just use in failing and take it to the next step, and you'd be surprised how life will help you out an awful lot if you just don't complain about it and just go on.
Yeah, what a great advice that is. I mean, and I think that's like a life lesson many people can learn because, again, like it's where I think a lot of people get stuck.
But they do. A lot of people get stuck. They get stuck and they look back. So I spent 7 years of my life doing this and it hasn't worked out. And woe is me. No. You learned an awful lot. You were successful. And there's the whole big world out there that you can get involved in. And what I call also you can pivot to some extent. I was doing pretty well with my hedge fund back toward the end of my career. And along came the University of Rochester, where I was a trustee, and asked me to be the chairman. And so I pivoted away from many of my principles, which, my principles was always, make a profit, earn a living. And I pivoted into the nonprofit where, I became the chairman and stopped making money. But I got a chance to do something very different that had a great deal of satisfaction. And it basically helped the rest of my life become a much more full and much more interesting and much more satisfying situation. I mean, I tell people that life is in 4 pieces. There's self, which you got to solve, somewhere in the first 25 or 30 years. There's family, which goes on most of your life, and it's a very complicated experience. And then there's work and business, where you spend too much of your time and sometimes doesn't pay off. And then there's community, which is giving back. And you should start giving back as soon as you get the first 3 things sort of under control. Once you can handle yourself, once you have a decent handle on your family, once you've got a decent work experience, then you should start giving back, because long term, that's really what's left. What's left basically family and friends and a contribution you've made to the system. And my contributions at the University of Rochester far exceed my business career. As you can tell, the names that I mentioned, E.F. Hutton, no longer here. Lehman Brothers, no longer here. And my company, Firm & Sells, is no longer here. They're all gone. But the University of Rochester and my scholarship students, which is where I place most of my philanthropic efforts, will be here for a very long time. And I think that when you have that, then you get a great deal of satisfaction and makes your life much more full.
Is that what kind of gives you a lot of passion and has you wake up in the morning kind of just ready to go?
Oh, yeah. One of my scholarship students, which I always use as a poster child, she's an optical engineering major. She just got her PhD, and she stood up she's also a concert pianist and a concert violinist, and she only weighs 100 pounds. Now, she stood up in front of a bunch of people, a couple hundred people at a ceremony I was at, and said, if it wasn't for Mr. Hajim, I wouldn't be here. Now, if that doesn't increase your passion and increase your drive and make you feel good, nothing will. And that happens on a kind of regular basis with me, because I have given scholarships to lots of different students, and it helped me through life, and so now I'm helping them through life. And you can, one of my friends who hasn't been as monetarily successful as I have, gives one scholarship at a time, but she basically really pays attention to her scholarship students, and they're like her children, and she follows them all through their lives, and it's really close. I can't do it because I have a couple hundred of them. I keep track of a few of them, but she keeps track of them, and she gains enormous amount of satisfaction out of them. And it's just wonderful that she writes about them and she takes care of them, and they talk regularly and so forth. So there are a lot of things you can do. Scholarship may not be your thing. Maybe, building. A friend of mine built a children's hospital and changed the whole neighborhood because he was able to finance and build a children's hospital. So I just find giving back is one of the things in your life you ought to check off your list somewhere along the line.
Well, I've heard them talk about how you can call your local school and see who has, debt for their lunches and just pay that off. It helps families out so much.
Well, no, you can't believe how the little things you can do that can really change things. My first scholarship program was a $100 book award at Westchester Community College. And I got letters from women who, I'm a mother I'm a single mother with 2 children. Your book award really helped me, and so forth, for $100.
Wow. Wow.
That was back when $100 was more real.
Well, Ed, I know you have the 4 Ps. That's part of just, I think, the heart and soul of this book. And I'd love for you to share that with our listeners.
Well, to me, there's only one constant in life. It sounds like it's a little overwhelming, but it's your inner voice. And, most people like myself talk to yourself on a regular basis. And I try to develop a language for that conversation. And I basically had these, what I call 4 Ps. Find your passion, which is an overused word, but it combines your talents, your likes, your dislikes, and the era in which you exist. But finding your passion is one of the most important things. Then find your principles, find the rules you want to find for your life, find the lines you won't cross. I was taught the golden rule by the nuns of the Catholic Church, do unto others. And given that I was very poor, there was a second golden rule, which I followed until I was in my mid-40s, which was he who has the gold rules. In other words, achieving financial security was very important to me. It was a very important principle. And it did color some of my decisions. Somewhere in my 40s, I decided I'd made enough money. I really wanted to choose freedom. So I chose, after I left Lehman Brothers, instead of choosing a fancy big firm like Morgan Stanley or First Boston, I chose a funny little firm like Furman Cells because I could be the boss and I'd had the freedom to do what I wanted to do. And I traded an office overlooking the harbor for an office overlooking another building. I traded a fancy dining room for a conference room with 2 hot plates. And I added principles all my life, and I had them on my wall. The last principle, maybe the most important one in my life, is gratitude. I somewhere 20, 25 years ago, I said, I really have to be grateful. So I do a lot of thanking of people. I think that's very important. And I have a whole bunch of principles, principles have to be you have to keep adding principles as you change your life, as you have children and success in business. You continue to add principles. I added a principle about the idea of helping people do better than they think they can. I added the principle of that you could accomplish almost anything if you don't worry about who gets the credit. I put that on my board. And then I went further to try to, if you can help it, deflect credit. When credit comes to you, try to find somebody else who deserves it as much as you do. Like people give me an enormous amount of credit for the success at the University of Rochester. We raised more money than they ever raised before. But the guy who really did the job was the president of the university, Joel Seligman. And I constantly deflect that credit because people like to give it to me because I was the chairman and I gave the largest gift. But he did the job. So deflecting credit was very important. So the third one is partners. If you find the right partners, you'll do very well. I was found that I've only been as good as the people I surround myself with. And that's very important. Of course, the most important partner, if you can find the right one, is a spouse. I call P1. And without Barbara, I wouldn't be here today. She's involved in every decision I ever made. She fills in all of the areas where I'm weak. She's really interested in me. We found that we love supporting each other. We love sharing life together. So that's very important. But in everything you do in business, when I had good partners, I succeeded. When I had no partners or the wrong partners, I failed. When you're in the Indian Masonry, when you're involved in a university or another charity, there are different kind of partners. You have to find the right partners. And the final P is plans. I find it's very important to write down your plans. So at least you know where you want to go and how you think you might get there. I know the expression that man plans and God laughs because things change. But if you have a plan, when you decide to change, you have a better chance of making a new plan than if you didn't have a plan in the beginning. And I find that in a plan, you have to sort of focus on what's happening in the world. What are the trends? What are the concepts? What are the themes? What are the big waves in your life? And if you write all that stuff down, I think it's very helpful in making decisions. And then finally, there's a fifth P, which I don't really talk too much about because it's a little more ephemeral, is if you get those 4 Ps right, then you'll end up with the most important P, which is purpose. Purpose and meaning in life. And I believe those 4 Ps will give you that. Now, you may have your own conversation with yourself. I may have left out something, but I believe it's important that you write down, in the case of all the 4 Ps, write down and try to understand them. And if you understand them, I think you have a greater chance of being successful. And it's more satisfying because you really feel that, you knew what you were doing when you were doing it. It's just not been luck.
Well, and success can be measured in so many different ways nowadays. I think people, especially now, are looking at, okay, yes, of course I want to make money, but I want to be fulfilled and happy at what I do as well.
The four P's does that for you. If you say my passion is doing something where I'm not going to make a lot of money, like be a teacher or a doctor in Ethiopia, then your principle will be that I'm not going to make money and it's not that important to me. And you face up to that. I mean, I have a friend of mine who's a spinal surgeon in Ethiopia. He'll never make any money, but he's very happy in what he does because he has enormous satisfaction and success. He's one of the few people who does spinal surgery in all of Africa. And so, I've only met him a couple of times, but he's just so impressive. But he has made those decisions, and he always has to surround himself with the right partners. He's written down his plans. But the most important thing, he found his passion, and his passion wasn't to make money. In my case, I had to make enough money because I was so poor as a youngster. It was very important to me to get financial security because I had fears of being poor again. And when you're poor, it's not so easy. And, financial security gives you great freedom to do certain things that you couldn't do otherwise.
It allows you to do so much. And, I really felt like your book really kind of offered people like a roadmap and how to really get to their next level in life in many ways.
And I also have little things in my book that, I think are very helpful to people. Things like if you want to take a vacation with your family, skiing is fine, going to a hotel is fine, but we take a boat. And one thing secret about a boat vacation, the first boats we took were very inexpensive. The kids can't get away at night. They have to sit around and talk. That's very important. Or when you're married early on, if you can take a car trip with your wife, and I did that, you'll talk in 4 or 5 days in a car, you'll talk about everything. Plus, you'll see a lot of things you wouldn't see otherwise. So those are things in my book that are kind of different. In addition, I'm a big real estate nut. I think that everybody should think about real estate as early in life and to find some sanctuary that they want to go to someday. And I'm very lucky at my stage right now. I have 2 wonderful sanctuary, one in Nantucket and one in Ocean Reef in the Key West. I could not afford to live here today, I don't think, but I started very early finding these places. And there are real estate cycles. And when the cycle is right, you save a little bit of money, you can enter those places, whether it's a cabin in the woods or a place on a beach or so forth. But early in your life, find a place where you can have sanctuary. The first place I had, I only could go to it once a year because I couldn't afford it. The fellow who I bought it from rented it out. And, actually, it didn't cost me very much money to have it. And then slowly but surely, as I was successful, I increased my real estate holdings. Because I think living is very important. And having a sanctuary, having something away from your business and family life is really important. It can be a very tiny place, but it really makes a difference. Those things are all in my book. Of course, I struggle with the fact that one of the most important things, the most difficult thing is to find that partner, because that really makes it worthwhile.
Well,
Find someone to share this whole experience with.
I from what we talked about last time, you have such an amazing partner with you that supports you and helps you with this. And I think it gives a lot of people, kind of hope like, hey, there are these type of partners out there that will support me in the work that I do.
Yeah. But it's a real work in process, because whether we like it or not, people really change. I mean, when you marry a 22-year-old young lady and she has 3 children, and you take her from Los Angeles to New Jersey, from New Jersey to Connecticut, people change. And, you have to spend time and energy really paying attention to how they change and how you have to accommodate that change and make sure you're contributing your part of it. When I said to my son-in-law, when he wanted to marry my daughter, I said, you got to love my daughter. And that's very important. That's an emotional experience and nothing. You can't put your hands around that. Second of all, you got to be committed to her. That's an intellectual decision. That has nothing to do with emotion or love. That's intellectual. Second of all, you have to learn to compromise, because you guys have to come together on a decision where you both don't really think it's a good idea, but you come together. And then finally, and most importantly, at points in everybody's life, you'll have to sacrifice. You have to do something you really don't want to do in order to keep the relationship together or to make it sad. She may have a job in a city that you don't want to go to or makes you unhappy, but you may have to do that. And if you recognize you start out that way, when it comes along, you'll be able to accept it. And I find that is something that, we've had to do, both of us, we've had to change. My poor wife came to New Jersey not knowing anybody with a small child. And I had to commute by subway from New Jersey, bus, and then a subway. We did that for a couple of years. Everybody goes through that. It was all a very good experience. But those are the 4 Ps, and those are the sort of the little things that are in the book. And I must admit, that's one of the reasons it seems to me the book has been successful. People call me up and they relate to those. One of my friends actually took a boat trip with his family, and he came back and said, it was the greatest thing we ever did. We really got to know each other over a 7-day period.
Oh, wow. That is so impressive. And it's true. When you're on a boat, you can't go anywhere. You're on the boat.
Yeah, and at night, especially if they're young adults, they have a couple of beers, and then people really start to, commune with each other.
Yeah. And that's kind of what we want, is people to really have that connection again, because it seems like we're really, in many ways, kind of lacking it now.
The people ask me about, I'm not a marriage counselor, but they say, how do you do it? I said, we talk. We make certain rules, never go to bed angry at each other. Always talk, even though it's difficult. And then constantly do that. Because if you go through a period, you may have periods in your life when, like I did, I said, look, the next couple of years are going to be tough because Lehman's a difficult place. My job's going to be difficult. I'm going to be a little less, happy, and a little less time for everybody. And, they accepted that. But very quickly, we had to sort of make sure to modify that, because you go too long without talking, without spending time with someone, you will grow apart. There's just no two ways about it. Children and, spouses. And children, unfortunately, require, a really a good amount of time. You really have to do it. And, it's very important. And each child determines that there's a certain amount of time. Some want an infinite amount of time. Some just need a certain amount of time. And some, don't require much time at all. You got to find that out. And I also find that their children are very individual. And that's something you have to learn very early, and spend time alone with them, so they know that you're interested in just them only.
What advice would you give for people who are just having a really difficult time creating change in their life?
Well, there are professional people that can help you. My daughter was in our business, and she was doing very, very well. But she just didn't really think that spending the rest of her life picking stocks for people that already had, good wealth, that was a good idea. And she met a man who basically was a career counselor. She spent a year working on that. And he said, what are your passions? And it was communications and writing and speaking. And now she's the curator for TED Talks, and she loves it. And she deals with all kinds of interesting people all the time, helping them, hone their talks and hone their ideas. And so she pivoted, and I give her a lot of credit. The same with me. When I pivoted away from business toward the eleemosynary, toward full-time nonprofit, I took on a couple of people. One of the people that worked with me for 35 years. I said, Steve, this is what I'm thinking about doing. What do you think? We sat down for a couple 3 weeks actually. Of course, I also did this with Barbara as well, and then even with one of my adult children, I talked to her as well. You have to bring your friends in, and it's important that you've developed friends over a long period of time, or groups. I have a couple of groups that I've met with for over 50 years, investment groups. I'm a member of something called YPO, Young Presidents Organization. And we've met monthly for nearly 40 years. Now we don't quite meet monthly anymore. There are a number of people who really know me. So when I go to them with a problem, where it's a pivot or something else, they can communicate with true information. They really have knowledge of me. I have a couple of investment groups the same way that I've been meeting with for over 50 years. Or just a friend that you cultivate over some period. Cultivate's a bad word, but really, initially, you have to make an effort to keep track of someone you really want to spend the rest of your life with. There was a fellow in my class who was a chemical engineer. We were naval officers together. He convinced me to go to Harvard Business School. And I must say, I talked to him almost every week. We actually worked together for a while. And when he was dying a few years back, I called him every weekend, and we talked. And he would still be more interested in me than in his problem. First words out of his mouth were, how's you doing? How are the children? How's Barbara? And so developing that is very important. You start that when you're in college. You really find someone who you really can commune with, who's a real friend, but also groups. And then there's professional people. And I use all of them. I think it's very important. I have a fellow on Wall Street, about 10 years senior to me, and every decision I made, I call Wally up and say, Wally, what do you think? And he would always comment very sagely. And most of the time I followed his advice. A couple of times I didn't. He wasn't that keen on Lehman Brothers, but I went anyway, and he turned out to be right, and I was wrong. But it's those kinds of people you keep track of. And I say, if you have to, and you may need a professional person that knows about career counseling, can take your talents and your passions and mold them and say, here's a path for you, and the money is well spent. But I think you should give every experience at least 3 years, unless it's obviously you've made a mistake, because you really don't get to know what you're doing until you really put in good 3. First year is just to, find out where things are. And second year, you're starting to find out what the job is. Third year, you're really learning, whether you can be successful, whether it's for you or not. But every 3 years, try to do a deep dive, take out what I call the yellow pad, or the iPad, and start writing down all the things you're thinking about. What are the satisfactions of your job? What are the problems? What are the frustrations and so forth? And then, put that aside and say, personally, what are you doing? I used to do a chart, which is really a funny one. What days do I spend on what? So I put my days down on work. I spend the days down on vacation, days down visiting grandma, days down visiting my mother, days on vacation and so forth. And look at the year, the complete year. It's really a humorous experience. You find out that you're really, in many respects, way out of balance. You're not spending enough time with your family. You're spending too much time on work. Just coming home an hour earlier changes that whole equation, and so on. Should I start coming home for dinner? And and then if you take these pieces I have these yellow pads, and you look at them year to year, you find out that you can actually make a progress. You can make progress on this stuff. If you want to lose 10 pounds and you decide to do it over 3 or 4 years, it's pretty easy, but you make sure you're disciplined in doing it. So I think that's really the essence of it. Once a year, just a quick dusting of the year, and each year can be much more complex. You have pandemic year, it really affects it big time, but then every 3 years I really do a deep dive on all of the self, work, family, and community. Am I doing enough in each of these areas? Am I in balance? I really have a modest goal. I want as many freshmen in college and seniors in high school to see whether they can read it and get something out of it.
I would agree with you on that. I think this is perfect for everyone that's going into, high school, college, you name it, because you're teaching life lessons that many people have never learned.
Yeah, this is Barbara Franklin, who was the 29th U.S. Secretary of Commerce. She said, the Ed Hajim story should be a must-read for every school in the United States, a very inspirational read. And I think that's I really want them to be inspired, and I want them to get these life lessons and just remove some of the bumps. Make that the early stage is a tough one. Being a freshman in college is almost impossible. You have to make certain decisions. I made decisions like I was going to bury my background forever. I deal with kids that have some very tough backgrounds. They have a very crucial decision. Whether they're going to let it hang out like a lot of kids do today, or bury it. A little deceit is not bad. Early in your life, a little. I didn't have to explain to everybody about my background. I said my mother died when I was 3. My father is a merchant marine. We live in a post office box in San Francisco. End of story. So I didn't have to tell my whole story for 4 years of college. I didn't have people digging into my background. And, that's psychologists tell you that's bad. It turned out to be good for me. And I recommend it to kids that they make that hard decision of whether they want to, live with their background or just put it in the closet for a while. It doesn't hurt you, I don't think.
No,
but each person to his own. Some kids may get very comfortable at letting it all hang out. Mom was a drunk and father was a prisoner and so on. So, it's okay if that makes you feel good and works well. I didn't want any sympathy. I didn't want anything special for me. I wanted to try to be like everybody else. Things have changed since then. It's not as easy to tell it now because I had to go back and separate the facts from what I remember. But it's time to tell it, and I think it's. And I also you deal with it. You deal with a background like mine much more maturely when you're older. And I a lot of times when I look back at it, I got emotional and I couldn't handle it. So I just put it away again, you know.
Oh my goodness, Ed. I mean, we could talk for hours. You're one of my favorite people, and I just loved your book, On the Road Less Traveled.
Thank you for reading it. I really appreciate it. Thank you for taking an interest. And I'm just hoping that, you know, with your interest and others' interest, we can make life a little easier for a bunch of young people.
Oh my goodness. I know that you're making a huge impact. You know, Ed, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the show with us here today.
Marianne, good luck. And as they say in the trade, may the force be with you.
Well, Ed, it's been such an honor to spend this time with you and to talk about your new book, On the Road Less Traveled, an unlikely journey from the orphanage to the boardroom. On the Road Less Traveled is available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and everywhere books are sold. And of course, support our indie bookstores. If you'd like to learn more about Ed, you can at his website, edhajim.com, for more information. Well, we're at the end of our time today. I would like to thank everyone for tuning in. You've been listening to Moments with Marianne, where we make every moment count.
In a single moment, your life can change. Moments with Marianne is a transformative hour that covers an endless array of topics with the best of the best. Her guests are leaders in their fields, ranging from inspirational authors, top industry leaders, and business and spiritual entrepreneurs. Each guest is gifted and a true visionary, a recognized leader in her own work, and while teaching others to develop, refocus, and grow, Marianne will bring the best guest and sometimes a special surprise. Don't miss this. You never know just which moment will change your life forever. Make sure to tune in and visit momentswithmarianne.com for more information.